What's up, guys? Welcome back to Think Big Bodybuilding Media. I'm Scott McNally, and we are back with Kuba Cielen. What's going on, man?
I'm fantastic, thank you, Scott. We've got some great topics to cover today, so I'm excited. I'm excited to get stuck in, man.
Hell yeah. We had a few listener questions, and I wanted to encourage you guys. Any questions that you have for Kuba and I, feel free to post them on the show. Plus, of course, if you're new to our content, we'd love to have you along for everything we do. We've got several bodybuilding podcasts that come out each week, so, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. You guys know what to do. What do you want to jump into first? We had, a few listener questions. You had a great topic. We touched on it a little bit before, but it was when to use free weights, when to use machines. Honestly, man, if you're up for it, I think that's a great place to jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually something that a fair few of my clients have asked, and then it's always a question that I get asked on my Instagram, and it's I've just recently moved back to some dumbbell pressing, right?
Okay.
And I did reply with more of a concrete response as to why I'm dumbbell pressing now and why I haven't been for a substantial amount of time. So let's break things down into categories, right? And when should you use free weights? When should you use machines? And give a little bit more context as to when you may see benefits of using one over the other, right? So I think first discussion that we need to have is accessibility. I think for most people, right, you will have to use what you have available to you. Now, if you do not have machines available to you, then you will only have to make do with machines, with free weights and dumbbells and cables, right? So I think first things first, it comes down to accessibility and what you have available to you. Now, I train at probably the most equipped gym in Europe. So the reason why I have majority of my programming laid out with machines is because I have access to machines that I really, really like and I can get a lot out of, right?
Yeah.
But this does not mean that I completely dismiss free weights. And when you look at my program as a whole, 90% of the work is always machine based, and then 10% of the work will be free weight. But again, one thing you have to look at is at what time of your timeline with your off season or prep is it wise to use free weights over machines. Now, the only time where, for example, I feel like you will benefit from using dumbbells and barbells for your pressing is when you are deeper in your off season. So right now I am 14, 15 weeks post-show, 16 weeks post-show, something like that. Actually, to be exact, I'm 18 weeks post-show, right? So okay. I am bringing my body weight up, and I feel like for me, at around 260, this is where I can actually perform the best when it comes to pressing, and this is where I can generate the most stability to be able to actually go into free weight lifts, and lifts that do not require external bracing. So these are generally movements that are going to be a squat pattern, like a safety bar squat, or an RDL, or a deadlift variation, and then you have dumbbell pressing, right? That's more so the free weight work that I think, if your goal is bodybuilding, that's mostly the movements you will incorporate in, right? So you'll always have like a deadlift variation in there, either a barbell row or a T-bar row, depending on your programming. And then for pressing, most people probably do dumbbells. Some people do barbell work. The reason why I don't do any barbell work is because in my gym, I have seen so many powerlifters tear the pecs benching. Yep. I just refuse to do it.
Dude, you're not alone, man. I feel like almost everybody who's had a major pec rupture has been on the barbell. Across the board, man. I agree 100%.
So I think first conversation, let's speak about machines and why and when should you use machines, right? I think machines not only are safer, but you go into a machine, right, you don't really need to think about much. You already have external bracing. That's the machine around you, right? All you have to do is get on, set your seat positioning, set your handle high, get your setup right. You go in and you press. It's very, very easy to do relative dumbbell pressing. So when are machines more productive? In my opinion, machines are more productive when you are dieting, when you're coming down in body weight, or even in maintenance phases, when you are more vulnerable and you are more prone to injury risk, down to either your recovery being compromised or down to you being at such low body fat point where you are going to be exposed to more risk handling free weights, right? So for me, it does not make any sense to try and attempt these lifts when I know that I will be able to perform at my best utilizing these lifts at a certain body weight. It only makes sense for me to actually go back into these lifts when I am at a certain body weight and when I do have enough bracing and stability through how heavy I am to be able to get productive working using these lifts. So moving on to free weights. For me, I think the best time to use free weights is always going to be deeper in your off season, when you have enough lubrication around your joints and ultimately you're not going to lift, right? Your water retention will be slightly higher, you'll have a safe body fat set point, you'll feel strong, you'll have enough body weight to be able to manhandle these lifts. And that is generally when you can actually progress these lifts better over time. So as a rule of thumb, right, machines when you're vulnerable, free weights deep into your off season when you can handle that loading and when you know you are at lesser injury risk, and more importantly, Scott, when your recovery is actually on point and you can actually recover from the additional work that will be placed upon you from having to handle these free weight lifts. And this is definitely something that many people miss out on, especially in prep. Like, some guys have got access to amazing machines, right? And instead they're like, right, I'm just going to stick to these dumbbells because they've worked for me off season, and you know, I refuse to use machines because it's less hardcore. It's like, it's not less hardcore. You are just being smarter. And 9 times out of 10, where I do see people injure themselves is through not making these smart changes in the training when it comes to different phases, right? So in short, machines are free weights. It's very much phase dependent, and it's very much dependent on whether you are in prep, whether you're in the off season, or even maintenance phases, or even health phases. And ultimately, if you are going through your off season and you do feel like that your joints are fragile for whatever reason, then use machines. It literally makes no difference.
Yeah.
And I really think that as long as you are putting the effort in, and as long as your execution is on point, and you are able to take your sets close to failure, it does not really matter whether you're using machines or free weights. They will both build muscle at pretty much the same rate. And I really do not believe that one is better than the other. I think we need to look at context, and we need to look at when one may be more beneficial over the other. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think, you know, kind of looking at things from your perspective, and the fact that you're really into progressive overload, like being able to progress is absolutely key. I think of how maybe guys like Mike Mentzer might have looked at machines, that like the early days of machines. I mean, they loved the Nautilus stuff, and there was a reason for that. You could load those machines heavy, right? And you could just focus on purely getting stronger without having to focus on as much stabilization. I could see how it makes sense to me from your perspective how this could, how this could make a lot of sense. You can load the hell out of a machine and push just as hard. If not, you might be able to push harder with a machine because you don't have to worry about stabilizing,
Absolutely, and you will inevitably, you'll feel safer in a machine as well. And even Dorian Yates himself said the main reason why he got injured in prep is because he didn't scale back on his training. And he actually tore his bicep, I believe, bent over rowing, for underarm grip, was it?
Yeah, I believe you're right.
Yeah. So I think that says it all, right? And Dorian is one of the greatest of all time, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I wonder how it would have been different had they had all the equipment they have today. I wonder how his training would have been different. I wonder how his look would have been different, and I wonder if he would have been able to hang in there a little bit longer too if he wanted.
To be honest, I really don't believe it would have been much different, because when you look at Dorian's training, majority of it was machines.
But he still loved that barbell row. That's when I think of him. I think of him on that barbell row. But yeah, I guess he did have hammer, didn't he? So he was using hammer strength, and of course the Nautilus or mock Nautilus pullover. And he didn't do free weight. He didn't do free weight legs either, did he?
No. So 90% of Dorian's training was actually machine based.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I guess when we started talking about him, I started just picturing him doing the barbell row in black and white. That's all I saw. In my head. The iconic picture with the headband on. Yeah, with the headband on. Yeah, that is the one. Yeah. So, I do think there's a lot of context to it, and the problem is at the moment as well is everybody wants to be right, and people refuse to acknowledge that sometimes they might be wrong. And look, you have to accept that there will always be something that you can learn from someone, and someone can actually bring something to the table that you may not even have thought about, right? So when you have all these guys living in different camps and basically saying, you should use machines or you should use free weights, well, why can you not use both when appropriate? Like, that makes the most sense to me, right? Use both. They're both just as good, and ultimately, if you want to use one and you can actually perform better with one of them, then use it. These are all tools for you to actually use, and they are all equally as effective. I really don't think that it should even be a conversation of machines over free weights. It should be more of a conversation of, right, when can I use machines to get more from them? And when can I potentially utilize more free weights and get more from them? Does that make sense? Yeah, absolutely. I've got a curveball for you. So you said, of course, availability is going to be a big thing. What about the guys training at home? There's going to be people that don't have free weights. What would be don't have machines. What would be your advice to them, guys who maybe don't have another option?
Variety, right? You can quite literally do the same exercise with different variations of it. So let's say you were using dumbbell press and you just doing a standard dumbbell press throughout your off season, and then you go into prep, right? What you can actually do going into prep, they even do dumbbell press banded, where you will see it heavy on the lockout, which is, in this day and age, people would say, well, you want it all heavy in the stretch. Like, yes, you do, but if you are handling loads that heavy in the stretch, that comes in itself with more injury risk anyway. As you are dieting, you can always find ways to make the exercise harder through different tempos, even adding bands. I mean, if you train at home with just dumbbells, you can always get some bands, put it around your back. I think John Meadows definitely made that quite popular back in his day. So adding bands is one option, right? And then the second option could be actually utilizing more specific tempo work. So again, you can slow down the eccentric, add pauses in the stretch. So you can quite literally make a certain load so much heavier than it actually is through just changing the way you execute it. So when you are at home, there's different methods that you can actually use, either bands, different tempos, different intensity techniques that will make that load feel safer, but also force you to actually use less load so that you can actually keep more accuracy and more safety at hand if at the time you actually need it. So if you are so limited and you don't have access to machines, it's completely fine. But you may just need to rethink your training a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a good topic overall, too. I'll look forward to hearing what everybody has to say. What do you guys think? What does our audience have to say about this one?
It's a controversial one. I do believe it's a very, very controversial one, because you do have people living in these camps these day and age where you cannot just have a happy medium of both, right? It needs to be so extreme, one way or the other. It's just, yeah, it can be quite nuts.
Dude, that's across the board with everything. Like, I don't care what it is. You know what I mean? Either you need to use a lot of gear or you shouldn't use any gear at all, you know, or barely any gear at all. It's either that Mike Van Wyck is a bully and needs to go to prison, or he didn't do anything wrong. You know what I mean? There's no in-betweens anymore.
Listen, it's one of the things, you can never have the right opinion, because whatever opinion you may have, it's always going to upset someone. So sometimes you're better off just not having one at all.
Yeah.
Now, one thing you mentioned about the gear, right? And that's one of the questions, is why do I not talk about gear much?
Yeah, we had somebody that messaged, and they said, this guy never talks about PEDs. I thought, man, this is a great topic. You know, my first thought was like, well, what's the most important thing to Kuba for growing muscle? Where's the thing that we can explore the most to try to get the most out of our bodybuilding? And I think my personal thought is that's because that's what training is. We can figure out the gear. The gear's done. You know what I mean? But the training, we can always, dude, I've been training for 20, 30 years, all my life, off and on, and then consistently for 20 years. And there's still more I can learn. I learned all the stuff I needed to learn about gear like a decade ago, really.
Yeah, the biggest issue I have with that is, when it comes to gear, it's super simple. It's literally all about what can you take that you can tolerate, right, with the milligrams that you need to grow, right? And most of the time, the milligrams they actually need to grow are probably going to be less and less if you are more accurate with your training, nutrition, and lifestyle. So the biggest shift that I've seen myself is when I explored the higher doses, and I've realized that it's actually not the doses that build the most muscle. So the people generally that I see on the internet that are so obsessed with drugs, they are taking 2, 3, 4 grams of gear. And no disrespect, but if you was to look at them, Scott, would you say that they're taking that much gear?
No, not in a lot of cases.
Probably not.
In a lot of cases, no.
So in 99% of cases, I think the guys that are just so obsessed about gear, and don't get me wrong, I love the topic of gear, and I still very much keep up to date with all the new shit that anyone ever brings to the table when it comes to gear. But the main reason why I don't talk about it is because I really don't think it's the most important. And the main thing I see with guys that are really dialed in with the training and nutrition is they will literally take 2 compounds with a little bit of growth, some insulin, and these guys are putting 30, 40, 50 pounds on during the off season, and then stepping on stage 12, 15 pounds heavier.
Yeah.
So if it was just about the gear and all these fancy compounds, then you would see monsters everywhere, because let me tell you, you see a lot of guys taking a lot of shit, and it's not really doing much for them. So for me, the biggest focus really has to be how you live your life, because how you live your life and your lifestyle ultimately dictates how well your training goes and how well your nutrition actually is, right? So for me, gear is just not that important. So I don't really talk about it, because if it was so important, it would be the first thing I would ever focus on. And I am the type of person that really focuses on what can I do to literally be that 1% better, and be better than I was yesterday, better than I was last year, better than last week. Whatever I can do to be better, I will do. And unfortunately, that is nothing to do with the drugs, because the drugs are super, super simple. The main 3 compounds that I personally love is always going to be test, primo, and mast. That is it.
Really?
I do not believe. Yeah, that's it. That's the 3 compounds that I believe I could literally use indefinitely. That's it. Don't really need anything else. Now, the guys that often just talk about the gear, when you look at the training and you look at nutrition and even the lifestyle, that's what's always lacking. So for me, I just don't focus on it that much, Scott, because there's no new compounds that have come out recently and have made us thought, right, this is what we should all be taking and doing, because the compounds that are still around now, it's the same compounds that guys have been using the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
It's super simple.
Yep.
Take what you need, take enough milligrams that you need to grow with the least possible side effects. And that could be a combination of a variety of different drugs for different people, right? Some people get on with EQ. I personally hate it. It makes me super anxious. So it's more of a case of trial and error, utilizing certain compounds and finding out what really works best for you. And I can promise you, when you've done it long enough and you've taken all the compounds, you've taken all the exotic compounds as well, you often realize that you always revert back to either one or two compounds of your choice that you feel really, really good on, you feel strong on, your appetite's good, your sleep's good, and you can progress well in the gym. Now, where I do often see a biggest issue as well is people often gauge how effective the cycle is through how much side effects they are getting, how much side effects they're experiencing.
Oh yeah.
Now for me, it's actually the opposite. If I'm experiencing any side effects, that means that the cycle is actually not the right cycle for me. When I'm on cycle, I shouldn't feel like I'm on cycle. My sleep should not be affected. My appetite should not be affected, and I should not be a massive watery balloon. I should actually feel good, and you should not feel like you're absolutely on cycle, if that makes sense, Scott. But that's just my take on it, right? I mean, listen, I'm a bodybuilder, right? If I didn't like the compounds, I won't be doing what I'm doing right now. It's just, I don't really tend to talk about them that much for that reason.
Yeah, I think that's a smart move, man. And it's what you've learned out of your experience. You know, it's not like you're making some sort of moral judgment. You know what I mean? It's not like you're like, oh, I decided I want to work harder. You just want to get the best results that you can. And that's what's led you to this decision. I feel like, me personally, I focused way too much on the gear early on. And I started thinking to myself, like, okay, well, you know, how do I combine different length esters so that I can, you know, kickstart the cycle with this and then move into these compounds? And it was really like this super over intellectualized cycle that was much more expensive, because now you've got like 7 different compounds in here that you're orchestrating throughout the cycle, when in reality, I made my absolute best progress on much less gear in focusing on the training. I realize now that you only have so much time in the day to learn new things. And if you spend that time learning about the nuances of like, we all need to understand how these drugs work. You know, that stuff is super important. There's like a lot of fundamental things that we need to be able to sort out. And then we need to be able to figure out, like you said, the things that work best for us, how we can manage a cycle without side effects while getting the results we want. Appetite is still good. Your sleep is good. All those things. You're not getting sides. But then beyond that, like if you invest that time into learning how to train better, I guarantee you, because there's never going to be a single answer to your training. What's best for you in training is always going to evolve. It depends on what you've been doing for the last 6 months. And because time keeps moving on, that answer is going to continually be different, you know?
I completely agree, mate. I completely agree. And it's a funny one, because over the years, the gear use has actually come down. It's not escalated. So you see a lot of guys talk about that. If you need to grow or get past a certain point, you will need more milligrams. Well, yes, to a point you will, yes. But if you have used a certain amount of drugs and you haven't seen the results that you potentially could have seen because of your lack of effort on the gym floor, lack of effort with sleep, lack of effort with stress management, and lack of effort with nutrition, then what do you think is going to happen when you scale back on the drugs? You put more effort into all these areas, you will get so much more from utilizing less. And that's exactly, and when I actually saw that shift in my personal development, when I scaled back on my nutrition, the super nutrition, right? When I scaled back on it and actually focused on all these other areas of my life, getting my training dialed in, making sure that I'm getting enough sleep, making sure that I'm actually bringing enough calories in to sustain growth over time, pushing up my body weight, that is when I've seen so much more progression. So why would I talk about the subs and the drugs when I just do not think that it's all that important? Don't get me wrong, once you've learnt the basics, like you've said, that's all there is to know. There's nothing more and there's nothing new that we will ever see someone come up with, because it's all been done twice over again. Like, nobody's going to come up with a new cycle that someone hasn't done.
Right.
No one is going to come up with some new concoction of compounds or new fancy cycle that's going to get you more results. It's never going to happen, Scott. Everyone's done it now over and over again. And I can promise you, probably between me and you, we've probably taken all the compounds and all different variations of them, right, twice over again. And once you realize that there's no real magic formula that makes you Phil Heath, then you realize, right, I probably need to start using my brain a little bit more and maybe be a little bit more cautious with what I do and how I do it. So yeah, I do honestly think that if people put a little bit more emphasis on really dialing in the whole picture, not just the drugs, you'd see a lot more progress without the need to be going, above certain crazy thresholds, right?
Yeah. And hey, if you really feel like you need to take all that, like you're on really high doses, then I would suggest just keep working on the training. Still put your focus into the training, and I guarantee you that you're going to get even more out of that crazy cycle, And
listen, if you're not really exploding for crazy cycle, then you're probably not really made for it. That's another thing as well, because everyone has a complete different response. I'm actually worked with some guys that can take 1,000 milligram total, right? And they will make crazy progress. But then I work with other guys that have used 2,000, 3,000 milligrams that are already at a very high level, Scott. They're already pros, right? They are dialed in with the training, dialed in with the sleep. And unfortunately, their genetic response is just not the same.
Yeah.
So you have to understand that what someone does and the results that they get, unfortunately, it may not be the same for you.
That's true.
Everyone has a completely different response to drugs, to training, and food. So you have to really, really accept that what 1,000 milligram might do for you versus what it's going to do for Phil Heath might be completely worlds apart. So I'm not even going to say that drugs don't play a role. They do play a massive role. They really do, yes. But again, you need to err with side of caution, and you need to try and exhaust all the other avenues that allow you to see progression before you put all your effort into the drugs as well.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Hey, we had a couple more questions. Somebody asked us about hydration. And this was a Patreon question for you. They asked you about hydration. What have you noticed in your own body, as well as with clients, when somebody is underhydrated, and how much water should we be drinking?
It depends. Anyone active, I really think a minimum, it should be between 4 to 6 liters per day. And again, I'm never going to expect a female that's 50 kilos to be drinking 6-7 liters of water per day, unless they are pretty hungry and they are extremely active. So my general recommendation for hydration, I think, is a minimum of 4 liters. And what I often see as well, Scott, is when you've got a lot of people that are eating cream of rice, eating a lot of oats, someone can be eating cream of rice 3 times per day, right? And they're putting 500-600 mils into that cream of rice. That in itself is going to add quite a little bit of fluid to your overall intake. So sometimes some people might be getting 8-9 liters of water per day. So, my general recommendation is drinking enough to stay hydrated, but not overdoing it where your toilet trips are so frequent. Now, I do not believe, and I'm not sure if you're the same, I don't believe that gauging your hydration status off the color of your urine is the best idea, because anyone that's supplementing with vitamin B, generally, if you take it first thing in the morning, a couple of hours later, the urine that you're passing is going to be discolored. So if you are taking certain vitamins, one thing you'll notice is that your urine color is going to be completely different. So I don't think that's the best way to gauge hydration. Generally, when someone is dehydrated, One, your cognitive function will slow down. Two, you may experience bloating. You may experience lack of appetite. And I think the biggest one is lack of energy and lack of pumps. Have you ever noticed, or have you ever done that yourself, if someone's ever told you to cut water when you competed, and then you probably realize you haven't got on a pump and you probably saw no veins, and then as soon as you drink some water after a show and get hydrated, all of a sudden you're riddled with veins and you're pumped.
Oh yeah. Yeah, dude, that was like my first two contests. I remember talking to my coach and saying like, man, I don't see the veins. You know, he's like, it's okay. Just get get pumped up, you know?
Yeah.
No, that was bad.
And then you didn't get a pump until you had some water.
Yeah. Yeah, I found for the place I noticed hydration issues the most was when I used to work a physical job, and I trained legs every Saturday religiously. And I just remember coming in absolutely zapped after work. So I worked on Saturday, and then, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock rolls around. I'm dragging into the gym on a hot summer day because I just couldn't get hydrated enough. And part of it too was back then we didn't really have the knowledge of electrolytes like we do now. Had I had an electrolyte supplement, I know I could have better held water, and I could have probably benefited from that, because instead my answer was, well, like, you take a pre-workout and then you just man up and power through it, do your best, and I would still train hard. I would still break my previous records, but man, it was a lot harder to get up and go. Not to mention you're in a lot more risk for injury, stuff like that. And you're probably not going to be your absolute strongest. That's the place I've sensed where my hydration is low, is based off of how my performance is in my workouts.
Performance. Absolutely. I think performance decline is it's not just water you need to pay attention to. It's also your salt intake. Now, electrolyte formulas are great, but I'm not a massive believer in them, because if you are taking enough salt in, I really don't think you need extra hydration on top from a hydration formula. So you don't need any extra electrolytes unless you are working a very, very physical job and you are excessively sweating all day. Then you may actually benefit from something stronger that is loaded with electrolytes, right? So as a rule of thumb, and that's always a suggestion I give out to clients, is 1 gram per 1 liter of water. So 1 gram of salt per 1 liter of water is about ideal of what you need to actually get hydrated. So generally, if I have clients, for example, checking blood sugars first thing in the morning, I will always tell them to do just 1 crank of salt with some water rather than just doing water on its own, because you need both for proper hydration. So generally, salt and water work hand in hand for hydration. It's not just one over the other. And if you just do water on its own with no salt, then one thing you'll notice is you'll probably start passing more water, and like you said yourself, you will not get adequately hydrated because you do not have the electrolytes to support that as well. Yeah. So you do need a mixture of both, 100%. But generally, I am not a massive believer. I'm not a massive believer in electrolytes. I really think that if you are putting enough salt on your food, relative to how much water you're drinking, it's all you need, really. So as a rule of thumb, before you train, if you are training first thing in the morning, I'd like to get at least 2 liters of water in before training. That's a minimum. And then if you are training first thing, I would often add just a little bit more salt in your pre-workout meal. And one thing you'll notice is much better pumps, much better endurance and training performance just with that little trick. Especially coming from someone that initially in the bodybuilding journey got told that salt was super bad for you, and I never added salt onto anything when I was like 16 and 17. Yeah. When I learned that salt isn't bad for you, and I started adding salt to my pre-workout meal and extra salt pre-workout as well, it literally led to mind-blowing pumps just off the back of that with no other changes. So do not skimp out on salt. Salt is actually good for you, and it's an essential mineral. It's not really going to be anything that does any damage for you, as probably what you see on social media in this day and age, where people demonize salt intake, right?
I think they're getting better with it. When I was a kid growing up, they were like, oh, you want to keep salt low because it's bad for your heart, For people that had high blood pressure, would get more water retention. But I'm with you that there's a balance there. And you can, you know, if you get enough water to a degree, you can flush that salt out, you know, like you were basically saying with your ratio. Yeah. I think that people are getting better with salt nowadays. By the way, I don't suggest an electrolyte to everybody. Oh, sorry. I think we have a lag here. It's still pretty choppy. I got to tell you, man. So thank you for everybody at home who's still following along with us. We appreciate you guys. Sorry, go ahead.
If it's too bad, Scott, if it's really bad, do you want to redo it, or are we good?
You know what? Well, let's push through because we were almost wrapped with this, right? And we'll call it good with this one, and we'll just try to let's get together and we'll make sure that the next one everything is works out better.
Yeah, it's probably my reception here, mate. That's probably not the most ideal.
Okay.
Well, right.
We'll push through. Like I said, we appreciate everybody who's following along.
Right. Happy days. Right. More questions?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I thought you were going to say something else. I think we have one more. Let me see if I can pull that up here. So we got to the PED question. Hey, we had a comment, and I wanted to pull this up because I started putting some pieces together. Every time that we've done a show together, you've had like a lot of really great things. You've got all these ideas that were planned, and you lay it out in this really clean, orderly fashion. Somebody had made this comment, and they said, I like how prepared and organized Kuba was for this. It's almost like he prepared for the podcast like a speaker, very concise and effective. And listen, I think that's a great compliment, man, and I agree with him 100%. And what I realized that last episode, we were talking all about basically putting your life together with a plan, knowing what you're doing, being organized for your day. And honestly, the way I see it and what I said to him was I feel like the podcast was just a reflection of how you basically walked the walk of what you were talking about in that show.
Yeah. Listen, I have lived a life that was very, very disorganized in past. And don't get me wrong, Scott, I managed to achieve a certain level of success, right? But when I realized that the biggest limiting factor that was holding me back was my inability to actually get my shit together and have a consistent schedule and a consistent routine, this is when, I came to almost a crossroad in my life in 2020. And that is when I really, really got a lot of high-level competitive athletes on board, and I was competing myself. And that's when I realized that if I do not structure my days in a certain way, I will not be able to be a great bodybuilder myself while still managing everything else I have to manage. So structure to your day is not only going to lead to more success in your bodybuilding endeavors, but if you can apply that same structure to everything else that you do, success is inevitable. I really think it is. So super simple, right? When we did the last podcast, it was about the optimizing the off season, and literally all I did was said, right, that's what I'm going to speak about. I literally put 5 topics on my phone, and I was like, right, bullet point number 1, bullet point number 2, bullet point number 3, bullet point number 4, and then bullet point number 5, and that's just as easy as that. And then it doesn't really have to be hard. And I think if you can structure your days better, you will find that you have a lot more power and you have a lot more time to your day as well. So I do think that having that sort of structure gives you more free time and more freedom and more power across everything that you do.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, man. It's getting to that point. It's finding that point where that crossroads you were talking about, where people say like, oh, you know what? If I'm ever going to, I realized at one point, it's like, hey, if I'm ever going to achieve anything that I'm really proud of in my life, I need to put more into this. You can
definitely tell with the way you handle yourself as well.
Oh, well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. We had a couple more. Somebody asked us, do you use a CPAP?
I do not. I don't need one.
There you go. That's what I told him too.
If I snored and if I felt that my sleep quality was suffering, then I would use one. But I do not snore, and my sleep quality is actually really, really good. So I don't need one. And again, with using a CPAP, I think it's very much genetic, because even some women need a CPAP, right? So if you need one, use one. If you don't need one, you're blessed, and you're lucky that you don't need one, really.
Yeah, Dusty and Ron, neither of them ever needed a CPAP. Ron was 315 pounds. Dusty was literally just about 300 pounds at the Olympia a couple of weeks ago. He wasn't even trying to get there. And, then me, I go to my doctor. I did a stress test this past year, and he looks down my throat and he says, "Oh my God, you have a CPAP, right?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And he said, "Good, because you have no airway." I hit 200 pounds, man, and I needed a CPAP. So there's definitely a genetic factor in there. You know what I'm saying?
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. And we had, let me see. I think that was it for the questions. And I had to tell you, I don't know if your ears were ringing, but you came up on It's Just Bodybuilding this past week. We were talking about the show here, and I told the guys, I was like, we never really came up with a solid name, because Ron was saying, well, what's it called? And I said, I liked Walking the Walk with Kuba Cielen, because you literally are walking what you talk. And then we threw it out there. We were like, hey, come up with some good names for the show. So we had another round of Name the Show. And I think the most creative one was this one. It says, regarding the Kuba name, I was thinking out loud to myself, combining Scott and Kuba, and came up with Scuba. He said, scuba diving deep regarding a certain topic. Scuba diving deep along those lines.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah. So
is it fitting? Is it fitting for the brand though?
I don't know, man.
We've got Think Big Bodybuilding. That's what I mean. It's Think Big Bodybuilding, right? It needs to be fitting for the Think Big. We
got Scuba with a snorkel on. We got a picture of Scuba with a snorkeling mask on and stuff like that. I don't know if people will figure that one out. They won't make the connection.
No.
All right. Listen.
It's a good effort though.
Yeah, so listen, you're what? Did you say you're 260 now?
Yeah, just about now, 260. So we're getting there. We're getting there, Scott. I told you another update we are going to do when I hit 270. So it's probably going to happen over the next 7-8 weeks, I would probably say.
Hell yeah. All right. I'm just kind of following along in the back of my head, because you were like, I think 255 last time we did the show. And that was right before the Olympia. Then you were traveling with Meg and your other clients. And, you had a lot going on there. Did you get some good workouts in at the Olympia in Vegas?
So because I was traveling, I timed it so it was going to be a deload week. So I didn't actually specifically plan to get any hard training in, because when you travel, inevitably, even though I always tick my boxes the way I need to, water's on point, food's on point always, but when you travel, the stress that you are going to be under, your sleep's not going to be the best, your recovery's not going to be the best, so it doesn't actually make sense to do sessions that you'd probably do at home at all-out intensity. So I literally use that week as a deload week, so I can get back home, be super fresh, and get ready to get back to business when I actually land home instead.
That's perfect.
So it was very tempting, because there was a lot of friends there that was like, do you want to train? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And I was like, look, I'm just going to have to say no this time, and I'm going to have to do my own thing, because using that week as an opportunity just to be present, let the week soak in, help Meg as much as I can, and just relax was definitely the best idea, because I came back home, Scott, I was fresh and I was ready for work again. Whereas if I trained hard throughout Vegas, it would have completely smashed me.
Oh yeah, with like the sleep schedule changes, we talked about hydration. I don't care how well you stay hydrated, but flying on a plane over the ocean and being in the desert and all that stuff, man, different sleep schedule, your hydration is not going to be perfect no matter what you do,
No. I definitely didn't feel right as well. Even the sessions that I did, because it was low volume and it was less intensity as well, I still didn't feel myself. I felt somewhat fragile. So again, reverting back to the conversation that we had earlier, there was a lot of machines used and not much going to failure that week, because again, I do not think my body would be able to handle it, to be honest. And my knees as well, they was completely wrecked. So I needed that week to reel it back off and just get super, super fresh. So I can get home and then get straight back to business. So I'm glad I did that, to be honest.
I like that. And the word at the Mutant booth, Kuba stopped by to see us over at the Mutant booth, and the word was, Ron and Dusty both independently said, man, Kuba's a lot bigger than I thought he was. In fact, Dusty's comment was, Kuba's the biggest reverse catfish there is. He looks 3 times bigger in person than he does online. So that's a compliment you got for the weekend there.
Listen, Scott, I'll take that all day long. I would rather be the reverse catfish than be one of the guys that looks huge on social media, and then you meet them, and you're like, oh my god, what happened to you, lads?
Yeah, wait, who is it? Oh, that's Kuba. Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. You surprised everyone, I guess, man. You came in, big and full, covered in veins still. It was a good look. All right, well, listen.
Much more to come. I think next time round, I should be a little bit heavier as well.
Right on. Well, keep us posted. And, of course, guys, follow Kuba over on social media and at his YouTube page. I've been putting Kuba's YouTube page in the description here, so you guys can head over there and see everything that him and Meg are doing. And congratulations to Meg again, man. She looked fucking incredible, dude.
She's here. Meg?
Yo!
Yeah, she did. She did well. She did well. She's happy, but we're gonna work. We're gonna get head down, get back to the off season, and then make sure she can bring the improvements that are needed to climb up the ranks again.
Hell yeah! Well, we all look forward to seeing that, man. And, of course, check out our advertisers, TrueNutrition.com and SupplementSource.ca for Canadians. Thank you to everybody from Patreon. Leave us questions for the next episode. And I'm going to get with Kuba after the show. We're going to figure something out. We'll get all the video and stuff all sorted out, so we're back to our normal selves for the next show. Kuba, it's a pleasure as always, man. Thanks for joining us, brother.
Thank you, my man.